Good morning, everybody. My name is Resham. I'm Global Head of Policy at the Open Data Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to be starting very shortly. I've got a brilliant lineup of panelists for you. So thank you for joining. If you want to pop in the chat where you're from, what you do, any particular interest you've got in diversity and tech, please do it. We will be recording this webinar, so you will be able to share with colleagues, friends, anyone else interested. But I will just give the others 30 seconds to join and then we will start shortly. Hello, everyone. My name is Resham. I'm Global Head of Policy at the Open Data Institute. I've got my fantastic colleague Jo on the call as well. She'll be popping some links into the chat later on. But if you've got any issues, concerns, thoughts, feel free to drop a message in there. It's great to see so many of you on a Tuesday. I was just thinking it is a Tuesday morning. If you want to pop into the chat where you're from, what you do, it would be lovely to know who we have here. And I'm going to ask Jo to pop us on to the next slide. So we will start the webinar shortly. Oh, sorry, Jo, I think your click has gone a bit excited. But I have got a brilliant lineup of speakers for you all. So I'm just going to announce, as I've said already, the webinar is being recorded. Please bear that in mind. Thank you so much for joining us. Introduce yourself in the chat. If you'd like to ask a question, pop it into the chat. We'll do our best. I'll make sure there's time for Q&A at the end. The webinar will be recorded. We will be sharing it on our YouTube channel afterwards. And do sign up. You've got the QR code there. Do sign up to our newsletter if you'd like us to send it to you. We do a weekly newsletter rounding up the most important news, very short but very informative, on AI and data. So do sign up to the Week in Data using that QR code. Next slide, please, Jo. I am delighted to be able to welcome you all to this conversation on diversity in tech. At the ODI, our mission is to build an open, trustworthy data ecosystem, one that genuinely works for people, communities, and the wider public. But the truth is we cannot build trustworthy technology on untrustworthy foundations. And we see time and time again that when data sets are incomplete, unrepresentative or biased, or when they're entirely inaccessible to community groups or marginalized groups, which I always find ironic when we say that about women, seeing as we are the majority, we end up with systems that reproduce and amplify inequality. And our recent work at the ODI has highlighted this, so we'll share this all later. But this is why we're championing the need for people, organizations, and trusted data institutions, organizations and champions for diversity in tech, so that we can make sure that people are not just simply the subjects of data and the subjects of technology, but partners in decisions about it. So who contributes to data and tech, who gets access to data and tech, who is at the table when tech is being designed. All of these things are really important. And I'm delighted that we're bringing these questions to the forefront. I've got three fantastic speakers to do so for me. I'm going to keep the introductions very short, just because you'll know who they are and they will introduce themselves as well. But I am so thrilled to have Baroness Harriet Harman, who was appointed as the UK Special Envoy for Women and Girls earlier this year. She's chair of the Fawcett Society, and she has also was the author of the Equalities Act. She's been a vocal advocate for women and girls throughout her career. I've also got Dr. Claire Thorne. She's an advisor and venture partner at global deep tech venture Deep Science Ventures, and she's also the co-chief executive officer of the industry-backed Tech for Good scale-up Tech She Can. Really brilliant organization. Do have a look. She does lots of work on inclusive AI and tech. And then last but definitely not least, I have Ashley, who is Ashley Ainsley, who is co-founder of Colour in Tech. It's a not-for-profit aiming to improve access, awareness, and opportunities for ethnic minorities to enter the tech industry. And he counts the likes of Meta, Google, Apple, Netflix, and Bloomberg as some of his business partners. So to start, I'd love to hand over to Harriet, and I'd love to ask, why does it matter who builds our technology? Why does diversity matter? And what do you think is the most important thing for the audience to know on this topic?
Well, I think it matters because AI matters and tech matters and actually offers the most profound opportunities that we'll have ever seen in our lifetime. So it's a huge moment of opportunity and potential, and we want to make sure that it works as best it can. And we know things work best if they work on the basis of a meritocracy. So that's the question of including everyone from the pool of talent that is there. We also know that there are problems in institutions if they're not diverse. They get to be groupthink, they don't make the best decisions. We can think of the financial sector, which didn't see the problems, which then became obvious because there was homogeneity around the boardroom table of everybody kind of mutually reinforcing and agreeing. So it's actually at a point where there is a major expansion, explosion, exponential change in a sector. That's not the time when you want a narrow leadership and groupthink. So we want it to be meritocracy. We want it not to suffer from groupthink. And we also want opportunities for women to be in that sector. Women have a right not to be discriminated against, not to be excluded from a growing and incredibly important sector. So there's the question of the rights of women not to be excluded from it. There is also the question of the systems and the system build, which you alluded to, Resh, which is that whilst AI and tech is undoubtedly an opportunity and a force for good, there is the possibility and the potential for very bad things to come out of it. And what you need to do is build in to the outset of the system a recognition and the potential problems so that those can be ironed out and that you don't see problems of entrenched discrimination built in from the outset. So all in all, I think I don't like to see it like those who are concerned about women's rights, human rights, rights for Black and minority ethnic people against tech and those people who are for tech. What we've got to do is make sure that we're all for the right sort of tech development. And that is very encouraging to see that there is a discussion about this within the sector itself. So, and I'd like to hear that really amplified. You know, I think, you know, organizations like Tech She Can and all those networks, I'd like to see them really recognized right from the top of tech, that this is hugely important that work is there, and they should be really lauding it and bringing it to the front. So I think the sector itself needs to be hyper aware of this. I think organisations outside the sector, whether they've dealt with race or disability or women's rights, need to be included in the conversation as you do, Resh, as ODI does. I also think that this has got to be high on the government's agenda. This is not some marginal issue, because otherwise we know what the pattern is. It will be ignored. Then there'll be a massive problem and everybody go, oh, this is terrible. We don't want to or need to get to that situation. The government needs to have it high on its agenda and right central to its work on AI, and also on the regulators. And I don't know, because it's great to see so many people joining this conversation. I haven't quite yet seen whether Ofcom has flashed up. I don't know whether anybody else has seen whether Ofcom are here in this conversation, but I want to say all power to the elbow of the people in Ofcom who are working on this issue, that Ofcom have got a major responsibility here in relation to ensuring tech doesn't discriminate against women, doesn't build in algorithms that are discriminatory, and includes women in its opportunities. So I think there's a big role for Ofcom on this, and I want to empower and strengthen their arm on it. And also the Equality and Human Rights Commission. They have a strategic priority to be dealing with this, ensuring that there isn't bias. But I think that I'd like to see a real strong partnership between those two regulators, Ofcom and the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And I think that I hope the sector won't resist this and realise that this is about making healthy tech which is sustainable because it's on the right basis and only brings solutions and doesn't actually entrench old problems and create new ones.
Amazing, Harriet. What solid opening remarks and plenty of food for thought. We'll come back to pick up on some of those, but I guess following on quite nicely to that, Ashley, I'd like to come to you because you obviously do a lot of work thinking about uh, jobs and skills across the tech sector. So as AI transforms jobs and skills, what should we be doing now to make sure that opportunity in the tech sector is more evenly distributed across ethnicity and, of course, gender and socioeconomic background?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because we've seen the government kind of say, okay, we want to train and have, I think it's 7.5 million people learn about kind of AI. But where's the meat on the bone? Like, what does that actually kind of mean? And I know, there are people on the back end who are kind of working on that, but we've actually been running a program nationally across the country for the last kind of year or so, actually going to a range of different stakeholder groups, both from gender and ethnicity. We've actually had more women on our programs than men. On that particular topic, I think about 30% were people from British, Asian backgrounds, and others from Black and Caribbean backgrounds. And what we've basically found is that actually there's a big regional disparity. I think we in London here, when I'm sat, are actually quite privileged. There's a lot of private sector opportunities to actually learn, to try, to play, to do different things with AI. But actually, when we went to Liverpool or Durham or even Leicester, not even too far away from where we are now, the actual opportunities for folks far, far, far well, declines really. It's a lot smaller. So we actually really want to make sure that we're thinking about this both geographically as well, because there are pockets of communities, especially from ethnic minority groups, that reside, frankly, outside of London. But yet they don't get, a proportion of those opportunities. And actually, where you survey people directly, they very much recognise that there is a bit of a kind of a brain drain, even, within the UK. And it's like, if you don't come over to the, to London as a big city, then you don't get these access to opportunities. And I think we can't necessarily miss that geographic scale. And I think especially for folks where they don't have the economic means to maybe, come to the city or to take the time out of work. And, we've been running the programs, in evening, we offer childcare support, we offer a load of different things to try and make it as accessible as we can. And I think we really need to think holistically about how we aren't going to just leave the usual suspects behind. Because there's a tendency to kind of just run forward. Let's always think about the frontier and the early adopters, and of course those people are important and they're working on really interesting things. But we risk growing a really particular digital divide from communities that already do find it hard to access even internet technology, even smartphone technology devices. And we can't necessarily kind of ignore some of those things. I think also what we found, and maybe I do have a vested interest in saying this, but we asked the question, so there we go. Is actually that people do prefer these things to not necessarily be from kind of some sort of national top-down kind of organization, but actually like to take advantage of things like Tetri Can, like Current Tech, like smaller community-based organizations that have particular focuses and niches on their needs, understand them, and actually can, I suppose, deliver and serve services in a way that if people are receptive to in those communities. And again, thinking about how to actually engage, there are a lot of great people doing work in this space. So thinking about how there are systems to actually empower those people and to help those folks scale some of the work that they do, yes, might require more more energy in some instances, but actually is more likely in our research to actually deliver greater impact. And just for us, we spent effectively 9 hours with cohorts of around classrooms worth of people. We found on average that they're saving about an hour a day. Now, you multiply that up across, how much time that is in, your week, in your month, in your year, and, the opportunity therefore in terms of what people are able to do productively, whether that is actually just spending more time on things like their own personal childcare, whether that is actually spending more things like, working on that entrepreneurial endeavor because you've now got a bit more time and capability to do things. We're finding 80+% of people are actually learning really hard skills. 80+% again think it's really practical and actually useful in what they're they're able to do, and actually they're saving time and therefore money with it. Like there's a real big economic incentive to actually get some of this stuff right, and that especially for communities which traditionally don't necessarily participate in the labour force as much or have difficulties achieving the same educational outcomes as some other groups as well. There's a really good opportunity to potentially close some of these gaps. So I'm quite positive in terms of its potential, but I recognise that we can't just pattern match to what we've done before and kind of just hope that somehow the private sector diffuses everywhere into where we need it to be.
Amazing. Love what you're saying about place-based and, you know, different challenges outside London, because it is so easy to talk about this from a Southeast England or London-centric point of view, if that's where you're based. Claire, I'd love to talk to you. You know, we've heard from Harriet and Ashley really wonderfully about kind of the inputs and why it matters who builds our technology. I'd like to get a bit more technical with you, because we know that algorithmic systems do produce biased or unequal outcomes. How should we tackle that? How can we ensure that the data sets that feed those systems are genuinely fair, representative, and transparent, so that we don't see discrimination against women, which we've seen in things like hiring processes. We've seen discrimination against ethnic minorities in parole hearings in the US, but of course, there's no reason why it wouldn't be the same here. How can we really make sure we've got good quality data, that the algorithms are fair, that we've got kind of the tech kind of from the doing it? How can we ensure that diversity there to help?
Yeah, sure. I think if we think about any emerging technologies or AI tools, products and services, the components are really two things, right? They're people and data. And if the people around the room that are building, testing, developing, deploying, upgrading these tools and products and services, and if the data sets, if neither of those two things are representative society, then we cannot be surprised at the outputs. So I think in terms of what we could do or what we'd like to see, I'd like to see something that's quite similar to, in terms of like legislation, like the gender pay gap, when that was introduced, you know, is a big game changer. Is there something that could be done that ensures that organizations that are developing and deploying tools and products and services have to declare the composition of the developer teams and be transparent about who's actually built this, but go one step further and try and quantify how representative that training data really is and where that data is sourced from. I think that would make a huge difference. I know within government, there's all sorts of changes happening. So for instance, in the UK government, AI Sandbox has recently been announced by Liz Kendall, where you can temporarily suspend regulation and test in a safe way. And that's obviously great as well. But I think ultimately it's the people and the training data. If I can pick up, if there's time, Resham, on the regional disparities that Ashley mentioned, absolutely, we see this, and the work that I do at Tech She Can, co-leading that charity, we see that every day. We see the realities in the classroom. So what it means is that the educational resources and the experiences we deliver locally, regionally, and nationally, we offer them often in low tech, mid tech, high tech form. So sometimes all that's required of that class is a pen and pencil, because we see the differences on the ground and we see what the schools are struggling with. I think it's really unhelpful when you go to roundtables often and we talk about the UK and we talk about schools as a system, as if it's one entity, and the homogeneity that Harriet mentioned, the regional disparities that Ashley mentioned, you know, it's really real. And when that's layered on top of the fact that digital inclusion is not solved, it makes it a really hard problem to tackle. So you've got the pace at which emerging technologies are being developed and deployed, the lack of lessons being learned. And I think Harriet mentioned this in her opener around, if you just take social media and regulation around that, the standards and ethics, they've never really caught up. And we're sort of correcting retrospectively for what's occurred. Then the digital inclusion foundational piece not being solved, and the regional disparities, and us all talking about, you know, one education system when actually no school looks the same. I think there's lots still to do.
Absolutely. Sorry, excuse me, totally agree on lots more to do. And thank you for that. It's really helpful to hear the experience, because, you know, people working on the ground like yourself and Ashley, obviously Harriet's doing lots as well with Fawcett and across her parliamentary work over many many, many years. It's really great to hear the perspectives, because I think lots of people don't really get into the schools or get into the tech companies to see that. So that's really valuable. My colleague Kay is just popping in a link about training on how to assess AI tools for equality's impact and ethics. So please do check that out. And I will be asking a few more questions, host's prerogative. But if you do have any questions you'd like to put to the group, to any of the panelists, please pop it into the Q&A, and I will make sure we get time to ask them. You can either direct it to kind of all of them in general, or if you've got a question specifically for someone, then that is fine. Harriet's just sorting out her tech, so I'm just going to come back to Ashley for a question, because Ashley, with Colour in Tech, you've done groundbreaking work increasing Black representation in tech and entrepreneurship. What are the key barriers, and in your experience, or kind of your oversight, what benefit has that increase in diversity had for the tech that's being produced? Why is this a good thing?
So gosh, what like should send you my my magnum opus of work, I suppose, as if I think about that. So I think first of all the barriers are a bit multifaceted and they've evolved over time. And I think actually interestingly in this kind of world of AI, I think they're evolving as well. So for example, if I take entrepreneurs, when we started Colour in Tech kind of 2016, 2018 sort of period of time, we actually found that even just getting conversations with investors and VCs, for example, was part of the problem. You know, if you didn't effectively have that warm introduction or pattern match, or, you know, been spat out by some sort of, you know, PayPal type company, you know, you basically had almost no chance of actually being able to raise any institutional funding. You know, if we fast forward, you know, 7, 8 years on from that moment in time, sadly, you still pretty much have very little chance. But the challenge has slightly changed. People now will have the conversation, but then they will still, for whatever reason, not support. So, you know, I think there has been an evolution. I think actually part of the barrier now, actually for a lot of businesses, is I think there's still a bit of about like knowledge and actually just found preparation. But I actually think some of the challenges that we now are hearing actually is about getting customers. And actually there was a lot of work done by people like MSD UK and kind of like, you know, around the pandemic time in particular about diversifying supply chains. But actually what we found is that organizations, especially in that B2B, especially in those B2B areas, are struggling to get that first big contract, that first enterprise contract. And, you know, we still think, for example, there's definitely more work that, you know, government can do to support that, both in their own procurement. It's notoriously hard and difficult, and you need bid riders and all sorts of kind of infrastructure around you to even become a government supplier, even at local government level. So you know we're really conscious that actually some of the barriers for those founders is particularly actually about that. You know, I think there is still racism and sexism and all these isms in society. I think, you know, this year more than most, all you have to do is really look around and you can see that. And I think it's quite easy to dance around the concept of, oh no, it's all these other things. I think, you know, there is still discrimination that happens. And, you know, unfortunately, I don't think we've made as much progress as a society on really rooting some of that out and bringing it to the fore so that it can be challenged as much as we'd like. And, you know, we're seeing some challenging, I suppose, trends and themes now about you know, people's attitude to people who practice Islam as a religion, or people who you know, present wearing certain attire. You know, that these things are now starting to become issues. And actually that's even based on how people are then perceived, not necessarily just in raising those funding, but actually in terms of, you know, just going out and, you know, being seen as a, you know, as a credible entrepreneur. I think one thing that I did want to definitely notice, and again, for young people, and especially we're here seeing this, you know, for minority groups where they don't necessarily have nepotism to rely on in the same ways, is that there are just fewer entry level opportunities. The time that it's now taking for someone who comes out of school or university to get a role has increased. The average starting salary, I'm pretty sure, is also decreasing for that as well. And a lot of students are finding it really hard to like get that first one on the ladder. And, you know, if I think about a barrier, what are the high quality opportunities in maths for some of these folks? And they're not necessarily being targeted in the same way that previously, you know, we'd seen. So in a way, there's a kind of regression to some of this progress. And I think, unfortunately, those are creating real barriers in terms of doing that. Now, to the final part of your question, and I'll be quick because I know Harriet's got a hand up and I've been talking for a while. You know, in terms of what the impact is, the honest answer is I think we'll see. Because, you know, if we take this AI kind of stuff, we can start to see that some of this technology is being rolled out. Often, you know, and something that we obviously, you know, get spoken about quite a lot is around kind of like policing and, you know, healthcare inequalities. And in some of the public sector things, you know, we're seeing a facial recognition technology be used. And, you know, let's see if it disproportionately affects the same sort of people that it historically has done. You know, we need to have more people in these rooms. We need to have more people challenging and making decisions around these things in an inclusive manner. And I'm not sure if we've made that progress to make that happen. So I think time will tell, but ironically, AI will speed up that feedback loop, and potentially not in a great way. But let me pause there. Oh, you're on mute, by the way. No worries.
Don't know how I got muted there. How strange. Someone wants to shut me up. Clearly they think I talk too much. Ashley, so much insight in there. I think people will be watching this back just to kind of pick apart all the different things you've said. But I do think that's really valid, kind of what you're saying about the feedback loop in particular speeding up. Harriet, let me come to you. We do have not only one, but two Harriet Harmans.
Oh, God.
Do you want to close one, Harriet?
I'm going to close one.
Yeah, we can hear you on both and see you on both. But do come in, please, and then Claire, I'll come to you.
Okay,
after.
I've closed that.
Perfect. We've got you.
Okay, so I think that the points that Claire and Ashley have made are what I don't want us to see is all their understanding and their predictions of the problems and their proposals for what the solutions are for both the health and strength of the role that EdTech is going to be playing, just be there, but not actually incorporated. So we end up with the ginormous "I told you so" moments. Is that and also we know something about the speed of the way that this is all developing, and so the question is the public policy structures, are they equipped with the sensitivity to listen to the points that Ashley and Claire and others are making, and can they do it at the right pace? I mean, I would like to see the equality, the Women and Equality Committee, which is a select committee in the House of Commons, working together with the DSIC committee, which is responsible for tech and innovation and business issues, together looking at this issue and doing an investigation and a report and proposing systems for the future to address it so that it's entrenched. But also we know from the Online Harms Act, which was first announced by David Cameron in 2013 and didn't get the royal assent till 2023, and now is still having guidance being consulted on and considered. It's all too slow. And parliamentary processes, which were developed hundreds of years ago, are simply not fit for the pace of change, and they lag behind and they lag expertise. So one of my suggestions is that we should delegate from the House of Commons, should delegate to a powerful, well-resourced committee of MPs, which would have standing membership, which means that those members would be there the whole time. They would build up expertise, they would build partnerships with the sector, and that they could do the delegated legislation. I'm worried if too much power is with the regulators, that they don't have the accountability and the legitimacy to make what is in effect law, although they've got the ability to act at speed. But the House of Commons, which has got the legitimacy and the accountability, is just too slow. So I think what we need to do is to change the processes in the House of Commons so that instead of it going like the Online Harms Bill did, with, you know, a green paper, a white paper, the draft bill, and then the long stages of legislation through both Houses of Commons and House of Lords, that you actually delegate that to a committee which is ultimately accountable to the House of Commons, but which is a committee of MPs which can actually do the legislation for the House of Commons, so that we don't, and that would be the House of Commons trusting those MPs to be knowledgeable, to be engaged with the sector, engaged with the public policy issues, and actually do the legislation for it. It would be a big change, but I think that the challenge is a big challenge, and we just cannot be left with a situation where we're just behind in years, and there seems to be no sign of the velocity slowing down. That actually the development is getting faster and faster, and therefore our regulatory systems have got to think how fit for purpose they are, and currently they are not. We need that combination of expertise and legitimacy and accountability, and that's what we haven't got, but there is a solution to it, which is what I've suggested.
Amazing, Harriet. Someone's asking how could a standing committee actually happen? What would need to change?
So what would happen is that the House of Commons would decide that it would delegate its own powers to a standing committee. So the House of Commons could do that just by deciding it itself. And I just think it is necessary. At the moment, as I say, it gets rounded by giving more powers to regulators. But I think it's really unfair on the regulators for them to make, in principle, big decisions. And I think often the regulators are nervous that they're encroaching on major substantive public policy areas without the mandate. The point about MPs is they've got the mandate to make this sort of thing. And if they delegate to a committee of MPs, at the moment we have bill committees, which are groups of MPs looking at a particular bill. We've got select committees, which is committees looking and scrutinising, but they don't have power to legislate. So we've got a committee system, but we don't have a system for a committee to actually do the business of the House of Commons in terms of actually legislating on behalf of the House of Commons. And I think a lot of people would think 650 MPs, many of whom are well, obviously all in touch with their constituents, but they don't have sufficient confidence and knowledge on the issue. It's just not a good way of dealing with something which is quite complex, as well as being very in broad.
Quite complex is an understatement, absolutely. I'm totally with you, Harriet. And actually, I've always looked at policy and legislating as like driving, looking in the rearview mirror, except now we're doing it, you know, in a Lamborghini, you know, and unable to even see things are going so quickly. So hopefully the Commons takes you up on that recommendation. Thank you very much. Claire, I can see you've got your hand up, and I don't know if you want to pick up a question as you're doing it, which is about how people in data sets representing society is important, but ultimately, how can you represent differences in society within a data set, given people are so different?
Sure. There's so much in what Harriet and Ashley have just said as well. I'll try and pick up on those and answer your question, Mesham. I think on the question of pace and whether the systems and processes in the UK are set up to deal with this, I think is obviously a huge question. So the way I think about it is that there is almost like a passive inevitability. There's a kind of an understanding now, a general feeling, you speak to any member of the public on the street, that AI is shaping our world, whether they're in it or they're not. And so my questions are always, well, who's shaping AI? Because the voices of so many people are deemed irrelevant or missing, and they're considered to be ultimately an end user as opposed to an active creator. So it's really about participation. I think there's also, on the pace point and the urgency point, what we see with the work at TextUCan is there is a huge tech skills shortage, and that is not one that is forecast. That's one that's happening right now, which is why we're fully funded by industry, because they're committed to changing that over a kind of 10, 15, 20-year pipeline, working with school children and beyond. And when we look at those two pieces of the puzzle for inclusion and inclusive technology, which is people and data, if we focus on the people bit for a minute, actually the way in which children from all walks of life across all parts of the UK with very different backgrounds and very different skills and experiences could potentially in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time be in one of those roles or be an active creator of technology varies by postcode. And varies by background. And so the work that we do at TextUCan is really about ensuring that access and opportunity is not reduced to serendipity. And we, the first, also on the point of pace, the first roundtable I was invited to on how we stem this issue of talent attraction and retention, etc., in the science and tech workforce was 20 years ago. And so there is a general kind of frustration that things are changing too slowly. Also, I was going to make the point around technology is now geopolitics. And it's now global power as well. So it's politics, it's power, it's the economy, it's all of those things. It's national security, it's critical infrastructure, it's UK competitiveness, it's UK growth. So there's a social, a societal and a business imperative to ensure that all children who are not yet in the workforce can aspire and can access pathways to be part of that future. And I think there's all these foundational pieces, and the infrastructures and the mechanisms, the regulatory environment is part of that. Digital inclusion is another that we haven't solved. And so the big ones rearing their heads at the moment are security, sovereignty, and equity. And the UK hasn't solved them in other parts of, in other sectors, other industries, and now they're amplified in tech. Yeah, I think my last points I was going to make was really about going back to the data sets and the people being representative and those missing voices. So in March this year, TechSheCan, we hosted our first Inclusive AI Summit for schools, and we had 240 girls from 10 schools across the Greater Manchester area. We had the then Minister for AI, we had it was in partnership with Accenture, and we had OpenAI and Video, etc. And we were really urging those girls from low socioeconomic and disadvantaged backgrounds to consider themselves as active future creators of technology. And the days are transformational. They really work. We know that 90% of them thought at the end of the day that their voices should be heard in the development and the deployment of these technologies. We had children, we had some of the girls say things like, I didn't realize so many people cared about us. And we had teachers saying this is like the most upskilling I've ever had in a single day. And the challenge for us is, and it goes back to that earlier point of scale, is we know these things work, but that was 240 girls in the Northwest, and we need to be doing this for every school. So it's a real question of whose responsibility is it to scale? And I think unless we take those initiatives national, we are not going to be solving the pipeline problem at source. And so in another 20 years, we're still going to have a workforce that is not representative of society. I don't know if that helped answer your question, Resham.
That really did, Claire. And actually, I think your security point is so valid, and it's kind of concerning how little we seem to talk about the tech as a geopolitical lever, and how essentially we are currently handing over influence and power to tech, being tech companies developing elsewhere and relying on that goodwill and kind of management. I will give a plug that yesterday our chairman and co-founder Sir Nigel Shadbolt gave evidence in Parliament to the National Security Strategy Joint Committee. I don't think the transcript or the recording are out yet, but we will email it out in our newsletter this week or next week when it is. But that was a really fascinating conversation about exactly the things you're talking about to do with tech and data and AI and security. I do think it's really important. Ashley, I will come to you in one second. I just wanted to pop back to Harriet because of some of the things Claire was talking about on the kind of pipeline and the skills, but Harriet Fawcett did a report, the Fawcett Society did a report on tech bro culture, which Ashley, you are definitely not a tech bro, given what Harriet's about to share. So just wanted to be clear, we are not lumping you in here. But I just think it was really important in case people don't think this is an issue anymore, or that it's just a pipeline issue. Harriet, can you tell us a bit about that report?
Well, you might think that because it's a frontier thing, that it's very modern, that it would have what we hope to be modern open attitudes. So it's very disappointing to look at the Fawcett Society's report, which it did jointly with Virgin in 2023, looking at attitudes of women and men in the tech sector. As I say, I would have hoped that it would be substantially more progressive and less discriminatory. But what it found was that the stereotypes, and this is probably because of the sort of tech background of it, that stereotypes run really deep and are racialized as well as gendered. And the finding was that 76% of tech workers had experienced gender bias or discrimination in the workplace at least once, and a substantial minority of men working in tech said that they felt that men were better suited to tech than women were. And therefore, these attitudes, we need to not just assume they're not there, we need to recognise on the basis of the research that's been done that they are there, that they're extremely undesirable in terms of the product and the outcome, but also in terms of the individuals that are subjected to it. And they need to be addressed actively as a central part of building a healthy system for the future. But it gets to me to your point in relation to Ashley, which is about male allyship, is that what we need not just is amplification of the voices of women like Claire and yourself, Resh, but we also need male allyship about women's inclusion and tackling stereotypes amongst men. And I think that what needs to, we can well understand what the role model is of a misogynist. And there are plenty of male role models. You don't need to look anywhere around to work out how to be a misogynist man. But where is the male role model for somebody who is a male ally of feminism in tech? The bar is set too low. It should be more than just not discriminating or not sexually harassing. That doesn't make you a male ally. To be a male ally means that you need to be cognizing of these things and actually taking action in support of women on this, not just recognizing it, but being an active ally. And I think that I would like to see the tech sector develop and promote the nature of the notion of male allyship. Perhaps people like Claire and Ashley will be able to tell me that there are male allies of men at the top of the tech sector who see this as fundamental and who've declared themselves to be male allies and put it at the heart of their work. And perhaps it's just that I don't know who they are, but I'd like to know who they are so I can be bigging them up. Are there men such as I describe? And who are they? And how can we show the value that should be placed on them and what heroes they are? But not.
Thank you for that provocation, Harry. I'm going to come to Ashley first, and then Claire, I will definitely come back to you. So Ashley, I know from our conversations in the past at the AI Fringe that you are indeed an ally, but also I would love to hear a similar question about twofold. One, about your experience of the attitude to ethnic minorities and tech. Does kind of the stuff Harriet was talking about land true, or do you think this is just purely a pipeline issue? And I have heard a lot of talk, so I should declare I have a public appointment. I'm deputy chair of the Social Mobility Commission, so I spend a lot of time thinking about social mobility and therefore the data around that too. And what we hear a lot is it's not for people like me. And we tend to hear that when we're asking people from socioeconomically deprived backgrounds. They say that they don't feel the tech sector is for people like them. Ashley, in your experience, I'd love to hear a bit about how can we support ethnic minorities? Is it a welcoming thing? Is it an attitudes thing? Is it a school support thing? Is it a location thing? Or is it something else?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of lots of different things. I mean, building on kind of what Harriet said, I think again, like, where are the and it's something we do, Black Tech Fest, BTF, we're trying to elevate, I suppose, role models and visibility of some of the great people in the sector. How I know there are some, amazing allies out there, I suppose, are their voices amplified as much as they need to be? Or, are they able to amplify those voices as much as they need to be within the constraints of all the other things that they do? I think that's a challenge, it's a question. And I definitely think there's more. If I think about ethnic minorities, I was chatting to another founder in this kind of space, and he was like talking about this stuff is now like it's like selling an illicit good. I mean, like, you just can't even talk about it to some people. Some people, when I say, that can be on the street, but that can be in some executive, meetings, like, the concept of now doing anything around, race, gender, ethnicity is so kind of like like you can literally see it on some people's faces. They kind of don't even know how to respond to it. So yeah, I think we are definitely in a challenging space, and going back to kind of what Claire was saying about trying to have some of these conversations at a national scale. I think. The positive part of me says, okay, policies might have changed over the last kind of 12 months or so, but some of the people are still the same, and I think there are a lot of people out there who do, want to see things like that happen. But, part of the problem is like some of the policies changed around some of this stuff. We've seen companies pull back and roll back far more than we would like. And, that impacts lots of different things, including our ability to scale, let alone survive. So, and therefore, I feel that actually, going back to that social mobility part, that, this is where governments do have a role to play in this. If there is a social benefit equity to making sure that we don't have pockets of deprivation, and that we do, equalize access to opportunity, that we do make sure that there are fair chances for people, regardless of where they are, their background, or the color of their skin, then, that is, if you go back to basic economics, there's a market failure there that somebody needs to correct. And we can't just assume that the industry is going to, like, work it out itself. Maybe there does need to be levels of intervention. So yeah, I kind of echo some of the stuff that Harriet said around, specifically on women, but I'd extend that to kind of all the protected characteristics. Actually, I don't think we see enough people from disabilities. I don't think we see enough people from different sexualities in some of these spaces as well. And I think that has a really big significant impact to what you said, Resham, about when you go and talk to young people, when you talk to that pipeline generation, to what Claire was saying, lots of people don't even think it's a space for them, or there's a place that they should be. It's a place that they self-select out of and don't opt into. But this isn't just something that is within primary schools or secondary schools. We regularly talk to people who are thinking about career switching, and they're like, oh, don't know if this could be for me, or if I could do this at all. I think that the industry has a bit of well, it has problems, and then it also has a branding problem, if that makes sense. And I don't think it's helped by some of the demigodic kind of ways that we talk about some of the people who lead some of the biggest tech companies out there. I don't think that speaks enough to kind of like the variety of things that are going on in the sector or the industry, or the opportunities that exist in it. And I think we're increasingly seeing a very narrow world view, in terms of what tech can do, or who should be in tech, or what does tech look like, and who does it serve, and for what purposes. So that's again kind of a wide range of answer. I think the other thing that I just want to pick up again on, so is the speed. Harriet, you're so right. Claire, you're so right. Like, it's really frustrating, and I think, even down to like the work that we've been trying to do, take this kind of, everything that's happened with the reshuffle and everything that's gone on the last few months. Just, I would like to say it's wading through treacle, but that would assume that I'm even doing the wading. Like, I mean, it's just so hard to get anything done, to make any substantive progress. And part of the problem we also have is that I'm generally sat there thinking that I don't even know if these people are going to be here this time next year. I don't know that about my own business, if that makes sense, because running your own business, you never know what's going to happen in the future. You kind of just work it out, but you don't know if the landscape is going
Absolutely.
there. And I think that's such a problem if you're trying to build long-term planning. You're trying to actually work on interventions that do take a little bit of time to organize and really think about getting right. And if everything changes, around you, and then you spend 6 months just trying to work out what was going on, it's really hard to make any substantive progress. And it's not just the realm of this, obviously, administration. We've had it for the last kind of years, but I've had more tech secretaries than I've had birthdays, and it's just ridiculous.
All right, amazing, Ashley. Thank you. Totally agree. It's hard to plan. It feels like we've had a lot of political instability lately, and well, trying to think back to how long ago we felt stable. Stefan and Hannah have very kindly shared some male allies for you, Harriet. I will come back to you shortly. I just wanted to pick up on a question in the chat for Claire, because actually Marissa has referenced data sets, and I think this is really important to talk about the data that we're collecting and how we can make sure that that's good quality. So when you're looking at whether it's kind of the work you're doing at Deep Science Ventures, the work you're doing at TechSheCan, the broader work on AI, how important is it for us to collect the data, to keep a track, to measure what's happening with girls, with ethnic minorities, with disabilities, social mobility, all of that? How important is it, and what can we do to make sure that the data we do have, we're able to use effectively, efficiently, and to kind of be more effective with our policy making?
I guess there's two things with the data, right? There's one is how we evaluate the impact we're having, and we report that impact when we're doing these initiatives and when we're doing this work that we do at TechSheCan. And then the other thing is, well, what are the data sets that these tools and technologies and products are used on? So they're very different questions. In terms of the first, so how we capture, evaluate and report to our funders and our industry partners on the work that we're doing and the efficacy of that work, it's super robust. I have a background in physics myself. We have a team of teachers that are out in schools every day. We have initiatives where we have 60,000 children join on a Teams webinar in a single day. So our live lessons, we regularly get those sorts of audiences. We see the demand from schools. And of course, with those like live, broad reach type programs that we offer, we know sheer numbers. And that's kind of it. We know where they are in the UK, which school they're from, postcode, etc. But with the in-depth work that we do, so in-person work, where we physically bring girls into the workplaces of our partner organisations for career discovery days and career insight days, with the AI summit that I mentioned, with our other career discovery days, with the embedding of TechSheCan teachers in specific regions. So we've got these programs, these multi-year programs that have already been, we're midway through, have been established in Yorkshire and in the Coventry area, where TechSheCan teachers are going back to the same schools for a 4 or 5 year period, working with the same cohorts of children to gather that longitudinal data. So all of the perception change, the increase in aspiration, the increase in awareness of what these roles are and these pathways into them, we can absolutely evidence that. And it's all overlaid with the social mobility data as well. So the Social Mobility Commission's and the Sutton Trust Opportunity Index, we're guided by all of that great work. In terms of the data sets that tools and products and services are trained on, that's obviously not our bag, but it's something we are trying to influence and trying to advocate for. And I think there's two things. There's one which is like a general trust deficit in society and amongst consumers, but just general public. And then there's around what AI tools and products and services can or should do to them. So some sort of trust deficit. And the other one is there's a data debt. So we know that the data that tools and products and services are being trained on are already not representative of society. So what can we do? What initiative could there be? Maybe a public one, maybe a government-backed one, to essentially create new modern data sets, like a huge effort like what you've got with Genomics England and the Biobank, for instance. What UK national data sets could we create to plug that gap and fill that data debt? And I think the two things are not unrelated, the trust deficit and the data debt. Just a couple of things, if I can, Resham, I don't know if I've got time to mention.
Yes.
I know we were talking before about perception change and things, and I really feel like the perceptions and attitudes and ultimately whether children intentionally pursue roles in technology and inspire and can do that is really connected to levels of national science and tech literacy, not AI specific, but general S&T national literacy. So how does the general public feel about science and technology? Do they feel it's important for economic growth? Does it touch every part of their life? And I feel like after COVID, when everybody on the street seemed to be an immunologist and a virologist, and they all sort of understood the terms that they were hearing all the time, we missed a real opportunity to say to the nation, this is the case for science and technology, and this is why it's really important for you. Just on the allies piece, if I can, the last one was so at Tech We Can, essentially we are shaping future male allies, because our schools program is Tech We Can for boys and schools, for boys and girls, and it's free for all schools, and we do everything with a social mobility lens. And so when we're out delivering in schools and working with schools, the boys are seeing female tech industry role models as well as male. So we're just not actively putting the girls off, really. And on the visible vocal leadership, I think it was Tim Cook in 2022, there was a BBC article, who was the last visible vocal big tech leader that talked about the skills and the talent gap. But I don't think we've seen that from a male or a woman senior leader. And I think with ED&I increasingly being politicised, there's been a reframing. And I feel like organisations like Tech We Can and many others, Colouring Tech, etc., if you're a public or third sector organisation, you're fragile anyway, and there is an independence, which means you cannot be speaking out about some of these issues, and that is where we need to see industry really step up and commit.
Amazing, thank you, Claire. Harriet, I'm going to come to you for just a minute and a half, and then Ashley, I'll give you a chance to have the last word. Harriet, when you're talking, you've obviously been in the kind of gender equality space for a very long time, and you've probably seen Amy's asked a question about is there a risk diversity doesn't just stall but actively regresses, and I think you've probably seen this cycle before. So give us your remarks, but if you could address that in your experience, that would be really helpful too.
Well, I'm a bit frustrated because I'm seeing the beginning of the sentences on the chat, but not the end of the sentence. So excuse my incompetence here, so fully understanding of the chat. I think what we've seen is over the decades, there's been a growing consensus that if you want a meritocracy, that you have to draw on all the talent. And if you want things to work well, you have to have a diverse team. And that has been gone from a marginal radical view to something in the mainstream, and a consensus has been built around it. And I haven't seen before what we are seeing now, which is a major attempt, an ideological attempt to roll back. And Ashley alluded to it, and Claire mentioned it specifically, that it's difficult to move things forwards anyway, and to tackle entrenched biases even in a new organization, in a new sector. But what we've got is headwinds against that in organized, misogynist, anti-woke culture ideology, which is coming from, sorry to mention the word, Donald Trump, is coming from the United States and challenging the whole notion of being aware of or concerned about these issues, and then has echoes in this country too. So it affects people in this country because many organizations work in the States and in the UK and are affected by the approach of the new administration of the States. But also we've got echoes of it here in reform. The anti-woke agenda, people are more nervous around it. Instead of people working together and talking about it in a reasonable way, it actually has become very contested. So what we need is a rollback resistance movement. We not got only to try and shape new fast-moving systems, but to be cognizing we're doing it in very strong headwinds. So I think that, bearing in mind how far we've come in the past, we can be confident that we can get past it, but we have to cognize that we're in a very difficult situation. And all the organizations, Claire talked about the difficulty of getting funding in this space. The organizations which are for rollback are massively well funded, to the tunes of hundreds of billions of pounds is poured into organizations which are countering the equality and diversity argument. And as far as the disappointment of there not being male leaders, men in leadership roles who make this their own issue in terms of championing women's equality, I think in a way we should do a bit of toughness here and do some naming and shaming. and actually do some auditing, because these leaders have got enormous responsibility and we need to hold them to account for this. So I'd like to see a league table, some sort of, Ofbro, some sort of evaluation that we could work out, a metrics, which is who is doing something on this, who is just neutral. And
Harriet, I'm gonna stop you on that because that is so true. But I need to give Ashley 30
Oh,
seconds.
keep going, Harriet.
But Harriet, we want Offbro. I love that. We need the audit. Thank you. Offbro trademark pending, Michael says. So yes, you heard it here first. Thank you, Ashley. Can you give us, if you can do it 30 seconds, great. If not, have a minute. I'm sure people will bear with us for another minute.
I don't know how I can follow that. Like, you're right in the flow. No, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, interestingly, we had like the Tech Talent Charter and that shut down. And that was trying to, I suppose, have some sort of membership body or organization to try and cajole, I suppose, organizations into committing to reporting some of their information or some of the data and reporting that back. And, in its place, what has happened really is a vacuum of nothingness ultimately. I think we're seeing less accountability on that. And I think this fear, this cultural fear, means that, the Offbro is, further away than ever. Companies, even if they are doing it, don't want to tell people they're doing it. I think we're in a real bind here ultimately. But that's why I feel like, and I'm super stressed and it's kind of to a frustration. I think that is where we do need like DCIT and some of the government to really kind of, set an example and do stuff. They've mentioned things like ethnicity pay gap reporting. There is legislation around some of these areas that, is kind of, floating around. Let's see if this actually really happens, because, without some of these things, in place, the regression's already started and I feel it will actually increase in speed otherwise.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. I'm sorry, I think we could have done another hour and still not had enough time to ask all the questions and hear all your insights. So thank you to each of the three of you for such a rich and honest conversation. What we've heard today reinforces something central to our mission at the ODI. Diversity isn't a nice to have, it's a prerequisite for fairness, for safety, and for trust. If our data is biased, if our tech systems are biased, if our tech workers are biased, and if communities are excluded from decision making, then we cannot hope to build AI or broader tech that works for everyone. So you've heard it here, the challenge, some of the potential solutions, some of the great work that's happening. As I said, the recording will be shared. Please do sign up. I think Joe will be able to put the QR code back up. So I think if you could all join me in a round of applause for, well, you won't be able to do it, but I'll do it on your behalf. Thank you all so much for giving up an hour of your time as well to join us. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully I got to enough that you feel happy. Do keep in touch with the ODI and we'll be writing this up in the coming weeks. Thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Bye.